Andre pushed the apartment door with his shoulder, keys still crooked in the lock. The hallway smelled the way late November always did in this building of wet coats, old wood, and a thin metallic note like coins rubbed between fingers. He dropped his bag, kicked off his shoes, and called out the way he always did. "Ilya, I'm home." No running feet. No voice from the bedroom, no clatter of Lego against the baseboard. Just the hush of a place that had been listening to itself for hours. He took 3 steps into the living room and stopped. Ilya lay on the floor, cheek pressed to the oak planks, one arm twisted under him and the other stretched out as if had been reaching. His mouth was parted, breath a shallow flutter that lifted his ribs and fell again. A thin bead of saliva gleamed at the corner of his lip and left a snail trail across his skin. His eyelids trembled but didn't open. In the far corner, hunched against the radiator, a dog crouched like a wad of shadow. Mud clotted its fur. Its ears were wrung to flat, to stiff, and its eyes had that bright and linking shine of something that has forgotten how to blink. White foam threaded its muzzle. When Andre moved, the dog raised its head and let a sound climb out of its throat, a sound like a plank prying loose, not a bark, not a whine, but a broken hinge. Andrei's body decided before his mind did. He was on his knees, 2 fingers to Ilya's neck pulse, thin and quick hand over the boy's mouth breath, yes eyes to the forearm wound, God. A ragged semicircle of punctures, the skin swollen and glossy, the edges darkening purple. Little swabs of dried blood flaked under his fingers. "Ilya, can you hear me?" he said, too loud because his own heartbeat was in his teeth. Ilya's lashes fluttered. His lips shaped a sound that didn't come. His fingers twitched and then went lax. Andre looked at the dog again. It had shifted forward, paws splayed, nails ticking on the wood. The foam roped from its mouth to the floor. It didn't pant. It didn't blink. It stared at him like a photograph. His phone was suddenly slippery. He jabbed 112 and spoke before the ring ended. "My son bitten by a dog. Hayes unconscious. It's in the apartment. There's foam, please." "Sir, stay on the line," the operator said, the voice steady, human, a dock in bad weather. "Address." He gave it. The dog took another inch. Andre rose slowly, pulling Ilya's limp body to him. The boy was hot, too hot, and backed toward the bedroom. The dog's head tracked them. It didn't lunge. It didn't need to. Andre felt the distance like a fuse, shortening. "Is the animal confined?" The operator asked. "If you can safely isolate it, do so. Do not approach. Do not attempt to restrain." "I'm closing the door," Andre said. He carried Ilya into the bedroom, laid him on the bed, and kicked the door, shoulder to wood, until the latch clicked. He shoved the dresser into place, the legs shrieking across the floor, and braced it with his hip. The dog's nails tapped on the other side, a metronome set to panic. "Help is on the way," the voice said. "How long since the bite?" "I don't know. I just got home." Hayes breathing. Hayes hot. Hayes not waking up. Keep him on his side. If he seizes, do not put anything in his mouth. "You said there is foam at the dog's mouth." "Yes." "Sir, that could indicate rabies." "Do not. I want. Please hurry." He laid Ilya in the recovery position, propped with a pillow, and watched his chest. The boy's breath hitched as if he were running in place, chased by something he couldn't see. Andre wiped the string of saliva from Ilya's lip with the edge of his shirt and tucked the blanket under him. The room was suddenly too bright, every object razor certain, the soccer poster, the paper rocket taped to the lamp, the blue hoodie crumpled near the chair. All the ordinary life that assumed tomorrow would be just like today. In the hall, the dog's weight slid down the length of the door. It made a sound like a man swallowing glass. Sirens arrived like a story you wish weren't about you. A knock, a voice, ambulance, and then police, then the deeper hush of people who do this all the time and have learned how to keep their voices small. "Where's the animal?" a uniform asked through the bedroom door. "In the hall." "Behind this," Andre said. He realized had been pressing his shoulder to the wood so hard his arm had gone numb. "Sir, step back into the room and stay there," the voice said. "Keep the child away from the doorway." They moved with a speed that felt slow because the minutes were loud. He could hear boots, radios, the click of a metal latch. Someone murmured, foaming, "Photophobia? See the hind limb ataxia?" Another voice, "We're not waiting." Then a pop flat and final, and the silence afterward tasted like a coin on the tongue. "Clear," someone said, and Rye's legs shook. He didn't realize he'd been breathing too fast until the room tipped and he had to sit on the carpet. He put his hand on Ilya's shoulder and felt the little heat there, the furnace of a small body working very hard. The paramedics came in with their own weather-cool air, the scent of antiseptic and rubber, the clipped syntax of competence. -1-year-old male. The lead medic asked, "Already at the bedside?" "9, Andre said. "He's 9. Unconscious on arrival. Documented dog bite to forearm." Unknown time of exposure, the medic narrated to her partner while checking Ilya's airway, pupils, and capillary refill. Pulse rapid, respirations shallow. Let's get an O2 cannula at 2 liters, IV access, glucose. A second medic set down a kit on the knit stand and lifted Ilya's arm. "When did he last eat?" she asked. "This morning," Andre said. "I think. I don't know." "Okay. Sir, can you tell me if he had any vomiting? Seizure activity? I found him like this." There's foam at his mouth. The dog, he realized he didn't want to say the word again. "We're treating this as a potential rabies exposure," the lead medic said, as much to herself as to him. "We're going straight to the infectious diseases unit." "Well, notify ahead for Rig and first vaccine dose, Rig." The letters meant nothing and everything. Andre felt them arrange themselves in his head like blocks. "What is that?" "Human rabies immune globulin," she said, kind and brisk. "It's antibodies, immediate protection before the vaccine trains his immune system. We inject as much as possible into and around the bite, and the rest intramuscularly. Then a vaccine series today, day 3, day 7, day 14. If Hayes immunocompromised, day 28 too. Well, also flush and debride the wound thoroughly and check tetanus status. Will he?" Andre swallowed. "Will he be okay?" "Rabies is deadly once symptoms start," she said, not flinching, but post-exposure prophylaxis is highly effective if given promptly. "We're moving fast." They moved. A blood pressure cuff whispered tight around Ilya's arm. A glucometer chirped. Tape hissed from a roll. Oxygen hissed. Words braided in the air. 20-gauge labs on arrival, fluids at maintenance, call surgery for wound. And then the stretcher was there, and his boy was on it, and Andre was following, one hand on the rail, the other pressing his wallet and phone into his coat pocket like talismans. In the corridor, the police officer, who had been a voice behind the door, was a person. He removed his gloves and spoke low. "We're very sorry, sir." The animal was clearly ill. "We've secured the remains for testing." "Testing?" Andre said, the word catching. "Rabies testing," the officer said. "They need the brain tissue to confirm. The public health lab runs a fluorescent antibody test. If it's positive, the health department will follow up with anyone who had contact. Regardless, your son's already on the right path." The officer's mouth kept moving, other sentences, other arrangements of comfort and procedure. Andre nodded because it was a thing he knew how to do. He let himself be guided into the elevator, into the cold night, into the ambulance, where he sat on the little side seat with his knees together like a schoolboy, hands between them, watching his son breathe. The city slid by in bands of sodium light and shadow. It had been the kind of day that feels like a pocket you forgot you had work, a late meeting, a plastic box of noodles eaten at a desk, but now every second had edges. He thought of Ilya's Halloween costumes still hanging on the hook, a paper crown head made at school, the scratch on his scooter head sworn was a tiger mark. He thought of the calendar on the fridge with the square around Saturday, soccer 10 o'clock. How could there still be a Saturday inside this night? Infectious diseases was bright in a way that made the dark inside him buckle. The triage nurse read the paramedics' report and waved them past the waiting room. A resident in a too-big coat met them at the bay, followed by a woman with the air of someone used to being obeyed. Doctor. Sokolova, infectious diseases, she said quickly, eyes on Ilya but voice on Andre. We're going to do 3 things immediately. First, we irrigate the wound 15 minutes with soap and water, then povidone iodine. That mechanical wash is one of the most important steps. Second, we infiltrate human rabies immune globulin 20 international units per kilogram directly into and around the wound. Whatever doesn't fit, we'll give intramuscularly at a separate site from the vaccine. Third, we administer the first dose of rabies vaccine. Today is day 0, then day 3, 7, 14. Well, check tetanus status and cover for by-wound flora with antibiotics if indicated. Any known allergies? No, Andre said. Had never been more grateful for a clean answer. How long between bite and now? She asked. I don't know. I found him maybe 20 minutes before the ambulance. That's good, she said simply. Sooner is better. They cut Ilya's shirt sleeve. The wound looked worse under the neutral honesty of hospital light. The nurse draped towels, and then the irrigation began, a steady, relentless flood of warm saline and soap that felt almost violent in its benignness. The resident narrated 15 minutes minimum debris, no obvious devitalized tissue, and the nurse squeezed the bag and the water ran pink and then clear and then pink again. I know this looks rough, the doctor said, but flushing physically removes virus particles from the wound. The vaccine will take about a week to stimulate his own antibodies. The immune globulin is the bridge. Andre nodded. He didn't trust his mouth. He watched the clock. He thought absurdly of the kitchen tap at home and the way the water hammer rattled the pipes if you turned it too fast. He thought of how Ilya dangled his fingers in the stream and sang to the suds as if they could hear him. Okay, the doctor said. Let's infiltrate. The syringe looked too big until he remembered how small a child's forearm is. They worked slowly, deliberately, finding every puncture track, turning the brimming white horseshoe under Ilya's skin into a map of protection. The boy stirred once, a small sound, and the anesthetic cream the nurse had smeared earlier did what it could. When they'd soaked every nook, the rest of the dose went into a muscle far from where the vaccine would go. Now the vaccine, the nurse said, and the doctor gave it, a quick press, a small bandage with a cartoon rocket as if the hospital had known it was Ilya coming. Any saliva to mucous membranes, doctor? Sokolova asked, eyes flicking to Andre with real concern. Did the dog lick his face? Did you touch your eyes or mouth after touching the saliva? I carried him, Andre said, replaying the room. I think I kept my hands away. I washed them after. He stopped. He couldn't afford to be imprecise. Well, have occupational health review you, she said gently. If there was significant exposure, you may also need vaccine. We are on the side of safety. A surgical paw arrived to neatly debride ragged edges, to align skin that would never look exactly the same again but would do the job. They checked Ilya's tetanus record booster due and updated it. They started fluids, ran labs. Andre learned the geography of the room as if he might live there. Monitor, suction, Sharp's container, the drawer that held the gauze, the machine that warmed the blankets. Somewhere in the middle of it, a public health officer spoke with Dr. Sokolova at the doorway, words in the formal tense of regulation, quarantine of contacts, post-exposure notifications, animal control has delivered the specimen to the state lab results overnight if courier makes the run. The realities of a system that exists exactly for nights like this. When the room finally exhaled, Ilya was asleep with intent instead of collapse. His forehead had cooled. His breath no longer fluttered like a trapped bird, but came and went with a rhythm that could belong to a child. Andre sat, forehead to the back of his own hand, and let the corner of the chair press a painful groove into his thigh. It was proof he was still embodied. Sir, doctor, Sokolova said, taking the seat across from him, the one where bad news usually lives. I want to be clear so you don't have to Google later. Rabies is almost universally fatal once clinical symptoms begin, but that is why post-exposure prophylaxis exists. You got him to us fast. We've done the most important things within hours. The vaccine series must be completed on schedule. We will schedule you before you leave this ward. He nodded because nodding was the one verb that didn't require breath. You did well, she said. You closed a door. You called. You let us do our work. That is what there is to do. He hadn't thought of it as doing well, had thought of it as falling down a staircase and somehow landing on the next one. What happens to the dog? He asked, and he hated himself for how small the question sounded. The animal has been euthanized, she said, plain but not unkind. Rabies testing requires brain tissue. If it's positive, that confirms our approach. If it's negative, we discuss the risk calculus, but given the presentation, we will almost certainly continue the series because false negatives can occur if sampling is inadequate. He nodded again. He didn't want to imagine the dog as anything but the thing in the hall. He didn't want to imagine it with a name, a first home, a moment when someone had scratched between its ears. A nurse brought him tea he didn't remember asking for. It tasted like the cup, which tasted like the shelf, which tasted like the corridor. He drank it gratefully anyway. Ours make their own weather in hospitals. Midnight is white, 3:m. Gray, for $1m, the kind of pale you only see in rooms with no windows. It was around that time that Ilya moaned and turned his head, his mouth working against the oxygen cannula as if he were trying to bite a stubborn string. Ilya? Andrei leaned forward, his voice a held breath. Buddy, I'm here. The boy's lash lifted. His eyes tried to focus, failed. Tried again? For a second his gaze slid past Andrei to the corner and his body flinched, a small quake. It's okay, Andrei said, and the relief hurt. It's okay. The dog is gone. You're safe. Ilya's lips cracked into something like a smile and then fell apart. My arm, he whispered, voice a rusted hinge. Doctors cleaned it. You got medicine. You're going to keep getting it for a few weeks. We have a schedule, and you know how you love schedules. He made his voice light on purpose because panic is a contagious disease too. Ilya's eyes drifted. Did I fall? You were brave, Andrei said. You scared the dog away. Then you fell. Then I came home. It wasn't exactly true, but it belonged to the same neighborhood, and that would do for now. Mom, Ilya said, the way he sometimes did in sleep, the way that still cut Andrei clean. I'm here, he said, because it was the thing he could say that was true. The monitor began to hum soft at a different tempo. The nurse appeared with a smile that had held 100 nights like this one. Hi, superhero, she said. Welcome back. Don't scratch the bandage or I'll have to wrap your whole arm in a ridiculous color and make your friends sign it. Ilya grinned despite the IV. Red, he whispered. Deal. She checked the line, the site, the numbers on the screen, the small arithmetic of survival. Then she looked at Andrei and lowered her voice. When the sun comes up, it gets easier, she said. It's a lie, but it's the kind of lie that helps until the truth catches up. He nodded because there are some sentences you accept on faith. At 5, a public health nurse came with a clipboard and questions that were Annette where had they been, who might have touched the saliva, had there been any bad exposures in the apartment building bats. Were there other pets? No. Was anyone else in the home immunocompromised? No. She took his contact information in a handwriting that looked like it had been learned in a different century and told him she'd call later with the lab result and the follow-up schedule. At 6, the window they didn't have began to feel as if it were letting in light. The fluorescent hum sounded less like a diagnosis and more like a fact of the world. Andrei stood and stretched and remembered his body again. He went to the sink and washed his hands for the 4th time, the hospital soap efficient and indifferent. He rubbed between his fingers, over his nails, along his wrists, counting like a child, 1 Mississippi to Mississippi. The way his father had taught him before there were iPhones with timers and had thought the Mississippi was a kind of clock. He came back to the bed and found Ilya asleep the way children sleep when their bodies have decided the day owes them nothing. Mouth open, palms curled, spine unafraid. Andrei sat, leaned his forearms on his knees, and let the chair mark him again. In the quiet, the night replayed itself in small scenes. As if the hospital had found a way to project his memory on the inside of his skull, the hinge sound from the dog's throat, the spatter of saline like rain on a windshield the certain way the doctor said. We're moving fast, the ridiculous sticker with the rocket. He felt the image of the living room, the corner, the radiator, the red bead on the floor begin to soften around the edges, the way a photograph does when it warms in your hands. He didn't know yet that the next days would turn into a syllabus. Day 0 vaccine, Day 3 vaccine, Day 7 vaccine. Day 14 vaccine wound checks phone calls from strangers who all knew his son's name. A report he'd have to sign that said exposure in a tone that made the word feel like a place they'd visited and left. He didn't know yet that sleep would come back to him the way guests do, cautiously, one bag at a time. He only knew that the dog was gone, the door had held, the people in this building could do with their hands what he could not, and that his boy was still breathing. He reached out, not touching the bandage, not touching the tape, just the sliver of wrist between, and put his fingers there as if he were learning a new instrument. "Hey," he whispered, to the room, to the morning, to the part of himself that had been sitting on a cold floor behind a door. "We're here." And the monitor, because it was kind in its way, answered him back in numbers that meant nothing and everything, steady as a metronome, singing the song of a heart that wanted another day. Morning found them in the kind of light that makes everything look temporary. Nurses traded night for day. Carts rattled. Someone laughed too loud at a station and then covered their mouth, remembering where they were. Ilya slept as if sleep itself were a medicine. A pediatric surgeon checked the dressing and said, "Looks clean. No devitalized tissue. Well, redress it later with a non-adherent layer and a light compression wrap. Keep the arm elevated today. Pain meds as needed. Acetaminophen first, ibuprofen with food if he tolerates." An infectious diseases fellow named Rafi came in with a tablet and a pen clipped to his badge by a piece of tape. He spoke to Andre the way you talk to someone who's been awake too long. "Quick recap," he said. "We've done the most important steps: copious irrigation, debridement, tetanus, rig, vaccine dose 1. Well, scheduled doses on Day 3, Day 7, Day 14. If he had any immune compromise, which he doesn't, twed at Day 28. Well, also give him oxycillin clavulinate to cover Pasteurella, staph, strep, oral anaerobes. Watch for fever, redness tracking up the arm, pus, new pain. If any of that, call us, don't wait." He paused. "I know you've heard the scary sentence about rabies being nearly universally fatal once symptoms start. The flip side is post-exposure prophylaxis works when given promptly. You got him here fast. That's the thing." It was strange what sentence a man chose to own. Andre decided to keep "that's the thing." A public health nurse reappeared mid-morning with a different clipboard and a tote bag that said "keep calm and wash your hands." "Hi again," she said. "Mvika, we've received the animal specimen. It went to the state lab by courier. They'll do a direct fluorescent antibody test on brain tissue. Best case, we have a result late tonight, more likely tomorrow morning. Regardless, we continue the series on schedule. Well, also do contact tracing for potential exposures." "Potential exposures," Andre echoed. He tasted the bureaucracy in the words and found it less bitter than had expected. Bureaucracy, he realized, is how a city remembers people it's never met. "Well, start with you," Bika said. "Any saliva from the dog to your mucous membranes? Did you get bitten or scratched? Were there open skin breaks that saliva could contact?" "I don't think so," Andre said, replaying the choreography in his head, the way he'd scooped Ilya, how he'd kept his hands high, the way he'd scrubbed them later as if they were trying to run away. "No bite. I closed a door. That door was a good decision," she said, and wrote something that looked like a compliment in a box labeled "actions taken." "Neighbors?" she asked. "Visitors? Anyone who might have touched the animal?" "Just us," he said. "We're just us." She nodded, as if that sentence were a kind of weather. By lunchtime, the ward had become a tiny town. The same people passed again with different instruments, like musicians changing from trumpet to clarinet between movements. A volunteer brought a small tray with broth and a popsicle. A child life specialist left crayons and a workbook about being brave at the hospital that made Andre want to both smile and throw it away. Ilya woke enough to lick the popsicle, winced at the first swallow, and then discovered the particular hunger that comes after fear. "Red one," he said, pointing with his chin. Doctor's orders, Andre said, because humor could live anywhere it wanted. They FaceTimed Andrei's sister, who lived in another city. She pressed the phone to her cheek and said, my God," in a tune that made it a lullaby. Ilya showed her the rocket sticker on his bandage and told her in a serious whisper that the hospital had exactly the juice boxes he liked, which, in the scale of things, felt like proof that the universe had not abandoned its detail work. In the afternoon, a social worker arrived with a soft voice and the impossible skill of making a plastic chair feel like an armchair. "How are you doing?" she asked. Andre opened his mouth to say, "Fine, thank you," because that sentence lived in the lobby of every conversation, but something else came out. "I didn't know a dog could have two voices," he said. "The one that you know, and the one that sounded like it was asking for help." She didn't blink. "Both can be true," she said. "And also, you did what you needed to do to protect your child." He nodded once, not because the sentence fixed anything, but because it built a small shelf inside where he could set one part of the night down for a while. They slept in pieces. The hospital taught them how. A nurse checked vitals at midnight, a phlebotomist came at 2 with an apology so practiced it had become a gentle spell at 4. The IV pump beeped as if trying not to wake itself. In the early blue, Andre dreamt that the dresser head shoved against the door had grown roots, and when he woke he couldn't decide whether that meant he wanted to never leave the hospital or make it part of his house. At 7, Raffi returned with coffee breath and a grin that made him look 15. "Good news of the ordinary kind," he said. "Labs unremarkable, wound looks good, vitals stable, neuro exam normal, no agitation, no hydrophobia. Well, switch the IV fluids to a heplock. If he eats breakfast and keeps it down, walking is the next superhero level." "Hydrophobia?" Ilya said, eyes widening, catching only the weirdest word as kids always did. "It means fear of water," Raffi said brightly. "A thing that can happen in rabies when it affects the brain. The muscles spasm when trying to swallow. You." However, he pointed at the empty juice box, are clearly part fish. "So we're not inviting those words to this room." Ilya nodded solemnly, as if a treaty had been signed. Around 10, the phone in Andrei's pocket buzzed with a number that said unknown and felt like a doorbell. "This is Vika from Public Health," the voice said. "We have the lab result. The dog tested positive for rabies." The hallway tilted, though the floor did not. Andre pinched the bridge of his nose and sat as if had planned to all along. "We expected this," Vika went on. "Given the clinical presentation, we were already acting as if it were positive. Your son's post-exposure prophylaxis is appropriate and on time. We will continue the vaccine schedule. We will also document this as a confirmed animal case and close the loop with animal control and the police report. It'll bring a written summary for your records." "Thank you," Andre said, and meant it in a way that felt new. "Thank you for certainty, even when the certainty is the scary kind," he told Dr. Sokolova when she came by, and she nodded once, like a chess player taking a piece she'd expected to lose in order to win the game. "This doesn't change our plan," she said. "We already built the bridge. We just found out the river was deeper." She printed a schedule and taped it to the cabinet. "Rabies vaccine schedule. Day 0 done, day 3. Day 7, day 14. She circled the dates with a marker and wrote times in a handwriting that was not actually neater than Andrei's but looked like a promise. "Where will we get the other doses?" Andre asked. "Here. You can return here," she said, "or we can coordinate with your local clinic. Same product throughout is ideal, but not mandatory. Current vaccines are interchangeable. The key is timing." "I like tape," Ilya murmured, eyes on the paper. "It keeps things from falling." "Engineers agree," Sokolova said. By late afternoon, the day had taught them its tricks. They walked the corridor slowly, Ilya's hand warm in Andrei's, the IV pole trading its identity for a friend. He waved at another kid in dinosaur pajamas who was dragging a pump the way one drags a reluctant dog, and the boy waved back with the gravity of astronauts. Back in the room, a call came from school. The vice principal's voice was kind in the official way. "We heard there was an incident," she said. "Is Ilya okay? Do you need anything from us?" "Yes," Andrei said, surprised to find that the answer was simple. "He's okay? Well, need to keep up with some appointments for a few weeks. He'll send you the dates. And maybe a note to parents in his class about not touching stray animals would be a good unit on community helpers, however you package it." "We can do that," she said. "We're so glad Hay's safe." The apartment was different in his mind now. He saw it with little red circles, like a sports analyst drawing routes on a replay: the door, the dresser, the angle of the hall, the spot where Head knelt. When the social worker asked gently about returning to the scene, he realized Head already returned 10 times in his head and had made the furniture move each time until the story came out right. In the evening, the police officer from the night before stopped buying clothes that made him look like a person instead of a job. "I wanted to check on your boy," he said, eyes flicking automatically to monitors and then away, as if respecting privacy extended to machines. "Hay's good," Andrei said. "We got the lab result. Positive." The officer's jaw moved once. "I'm sorry. I know that's heavy even when it doesn't change the medical plan. Animal control is canvassing the area for potential other exposures. Well, post notices. If you need a copy of the report for any reason, insurance, landlord, call this number." He slid a card out like a magician, producing the right card on the first try. "Thank you," Andrei said, collecting small squares of certainty like stamps. That night, the hospital got quiet the way libraries do just before closing, even though hospitals never close. A nurse named Lika, who had a tiny cloud tattoo on her wrist that made Ilya smile, changed the dressing and spoke to him like he was the assistant. "Ready?" she said. "You're going to help me count. 10 seconds of hand washing, then 20. Then we pretend we forgot and do 10 more just to show off." They washed like conspirators and redressed the wound, and afterward, when Ilya yawned the yawn that registers as a body voting for bed, Lika leaned to Andrei and said, "I had my pep last year. Bad in my parents' attic. We never found a bite, but we did the series. Boring and effective. My favorite combination." "Thank you," Andrei said, and realized he was starting to collect not just facts, but stories, things that happen to other people that make your own thing feel less like the only thing. At 3 a.m., when all useful sleep is on strike, Andrei stood by the window that wasn't a window and watched the shadow of the IV pole on the curtain. He thought of the dog again, not as a monster, but as a mammal with a brain that had been taken over by a virus that does not negotiate. He let himself feel sorry for it for exactly 3 breaths, and then he put that away because he wanted to keep his empathy in a jar that his son could open, and the jar was not bottomless. Day 3 came with a shuttle ride to the outpatient clinic 2 floors down and a sticker that said Day 3 done like a marathon mile marker. The nurse who gave the shot had a collection of enamel pins on her badge, microbes with smiling faces, and one of them, a little rabies virus shaped like a bullet, made Andrei bark a laugh he hadn't meant to. "Dark humor is still humor," she said cheerfully. "You're allowed?" Day 4 brought a phone call from a neighbor who had seen the animal control notice and wanted to know, in the tone of someone auditioning for the role of concerned person, whether Andrei had considered rehoming. Andrei said evenly that there had been nothing to rehome, and then repeated to himself out loud after the call, "You will not let other people write your night," until the sentence became furniture. Day 5 brought itchiness under the edges of the bandage, a sign of healing that also made Ilya a little monster. Day 6 brought a new backpack from Aunt Sveta, embroidered with a rocket that looked suspiciously like the bandage sticker. Day 7 brought another vaccine dose and a high five with Raffi in the hull and a discussion about whether red popsicles were scientifically better than purple they were. And Day 8 brought a night without dreams that Andrei could remember, which was itself a kind of dream. By Day 14, the routine had carved grooves where fear had been. They kept the appointments like holidays. Ilya's arm looked like a map with one city where a meteor had landed and been carefully cleaned up by small patient people with brooms. The scar would be a story, but not a headline. They went home the day after the lab result with a folder of papers, a printout list of return precautions that included words Andre had come to respect: fever, confusion, new weakness, trouble swallowing, and a magnet for the fridge with the clinic's number. The apartment smelled like themselves. Andre stood in the doorway a second longer than necessary, then moved the dresser back to where it had been. Not because he trusted the world, but because he wanted to show Ilya that furniture does not have to live with its trauma. They vacuumed the living room because it felt like a ceremony. Andre threw away the shirt he'd used to wipe Ilya's mouth that first minute and then reached into the trash and took it back and washed it twice. He wasn't superstitious, but he was a father, which is its own religion. That night, Ilya crawled into his own bed and slept sideways, as if occupying the world into directions at once. Andre sat in the chair in the hall with the door open the width of his hand and a book he didn't read. He fell asleep with his head against the frame. He woke to sunlight and the sound of cereal hitting a bowl like small rain. "Can I go to school tomorrow?" Ilya asked, mouth full. "Well, check with Dr. Sokolova," Andre said. "But yes. We're going back to ordinary." "What's ordinary?" Ilya asked, a philosopher with milk on his lip. "It's the thing you don't notice until it's gone," Andre said. "And then you notice it all the time when it comes back." On day 14, after the last shot, after the last form, after the last nod from public health that said, unofficially, "Welcome back to the unremarkable," they walked out of the clinic into a day that smelled like sidewalks warming. Ilya took Andrei's hand without looking, the way he had when he was 3 and every curb was a cliff. Andre squeezed twice. "What does that mean?" Ilya asked because he was 9 and had learned to interrogate affection. "It means we're here," Andre said, "and we get more days." They turned the corner toward home. The door would open. The hinges would sound like hinges. The living room would hold only furniture. The calendar would have a square around Saturday again. They did not know yet that fear would sometimes show up in the form of a dog in a movie, a tap that coughed before it ran, a hallway shadow that looked briefly like a crouch. They did not know yet that time would sand those edges, that the scar would change color in the summer, that Ilya would one day show it to a friend and say, "Dog bite, long story," and it would be both less and more than the truth. For now, it was enough that the story had a middle, and that the middle contained doctors who knew where to put needles, nurses who knew which jokes were true, and a father who had learned the exact weight of a dresser and the exact distance between his front door and his boy's wrist. It was enough that the vaccine schedule was finished, the immune system had been taught its lesson, and the river they'd crossed was behind them even if the sound of it still lived in their ears. It was enough that they got to go home. The first morning back felt like a rehearsal for a life they used to know. Sunlight lay across the kitchen table in a rectangle Ilya used as a launch pad for toy rockets. The milk sweated on the counter. Andre poured cereal like a man performing muscle memory tilt, stop, listened to the soft rain of corn rings and watched for any sign that the ordinary would refuse to come when called. "It tastes like Monday," Ilya said, chewing with the seriousness of a scientist. "It is Monday," Andre said, glancing at the clock as if confirmation lived there. They left early, not because distance demanded it, but because the hallway did. Andre opened the apartment door, waited half a beat, then stepped forward. The hinge sounded like a hinge. No breath on the other side, no skitter, no wrongness. He exhaled. "Dad?" Ilya asked, reading the way Andrei's shoulders had become a second set of lungs. "We're okay," Andre said, and tried to let his body agree. On the stairs they met Mrs. Sokolova from 5B, the one who always smelled faintly of dill and wore sneakers like a queen. She touched Ilya's arm without touching the bandage. Zdorovenki, she said. Strong boy. Strong is a team sport, Andrei replied, surprising himself with the phrase and liking it enough to keep it. Outside, the air had the brittle taste of March waking up too early. The world looked as if it had been put away carefully and taken back out street signs in their places, the bus sign to a stop, a woman tugging a reluctant toddler in a puffy jacket whose shape was more circle than child. Ilya's hand found and writhed the way it did at crosswalks, fingers slotting into spaces that had been cast just for them. School smelled like pencil shavings and floor cleaner like every September forever. The vice principal met them at the door, mouth doing the careful smile of an adult who wants to hug but remembers policies. We're so glad you're back, she said. We briefed the staff. Nurse Lena is ready for any dressing questions. And we talked with the class about not approaching stray animals and about being kind. She let the last word sit, aware of their size. I like kind, Ilya said. His voice had the roughness of a new violin string. It's easier to carry than mean. The hallway to his classroom had changed while he was gone. The art on the walls had moved forward a unit, more kites now, fewer snowmen. He paused by a drawing of a dog someone had colored purple, then stepped past it with the deliberate dignity of a king deciding which treaties still held. In the classroom, 22 kids turned as one organism. For a breath, Andrei saw the moment split, the version in which a child said something sharp in the way children do when fear wears the mask of a joke, and the version in which the room became a blanket. The second version won. Chairs scraped a chorus of hi. Ilya rang, unsynchronized and perfect. Genya, who had once declared himself the fastest child in the world, raised his hand without waiting to be called on and said, I saved you a seat, which is a sentence that is also a spell. Nurse Lena came mid-morning, a gentle apparition with a lanyard heavy enough to hold a collection. She knelt, eyes level with Ilyas, and explained dressing changes in the tone of secrets. When it itches, she said, that's the skin arguing with the glue. You can scratch around it with 2 fingers like this, little circles. Or you can come to my office and I'll show you the back scratcher I keep for emergencies. She lowered her voice. It is shaped like a dinosaur. Stegosaurus? Ilya asked because precision matters. Triceratops, she said, solemn. We are a horn-forward operation. Recess was a test the way bridges are tests. The blacktop still had last autumn's chalk ghosts. Soccer, as promised on the calendar, had resumed without asking permission from fate. When the ball rolled toward Ilya, he hesitated, then stepped, then kicked a clean pass, not ambitious, not timid. The children recalculated around him as if he were a new piece in a puzzle that still made sense. At pickup, Miss Halperin, his teacher, handed Andrei a folder of makeup work, half-graded. I adjusted expectations, she said. Well, focus on the writing piece first. Hayes got a voice. He wrote, the hospital smells like the inside of a refrigerator that knows secrets. I'm stealing that. Pay him royalties, Andrei said, and for once the joke landed as lightly as he intended. They walked home the long way. Not because they needed more steps, but because Andrei wanted to practice being outside without thinking of corners. They stopped at the bakery for bread they didn't need. The woman behind the counter slipped an extra pastry into the bag with the conspiratorial air of someone smuggling hope. At home, Andrei set the folder on the table, lined up the vaccine schedule on the fridge so the magnets looked like they'd been placed by a careful machine, and wrote on a sticky note, Day 7 done. Day 14 coming. We're doing this. He didn't realize until he stuck it to the kettle that had addressed the note to both of them. That night the first nightmare came like weather changing without warning. Ilya woke with a sound too old for a 9-year-old, eyes wide and not seeing. Andrei was there in one step. Hey, you're here, he said, the sentence already defined in his throat. You're here. I couldn't drink, Ilya said, gulping air. In the dream I couldn't drink and the water was a mouth. Andrei thought of the ugly, accurate word hydrophobia and hated it for a second time. He brought water anyway because ritual matters, and Ilya sipped, shivered, and then held the cup as if it were a passport. We can put a light on, Andrei said. I want dark, Ilya said, but with you in it. I can do that, Andre said, and slid down the wall to the floor, knees up, head resting back. Had been a parent long enough to know some nights you sleep like a guard dog and some nights like a gate. In the morning, he emailed the clinic psychologist whose card had been tucked into their discharge packet. The reply came fast. We can meet Thursday at 4. Well, make a plan together. Plans were a bomb. He wrote back yes and felt something unclench between his shoulder blades. Therapy took place in a room that managed the magic trick of not smelling like a room where people tell the truth, doctor. Myra was small and wry, with a collection of sand trays and figurines in tidy bins, knights, bridges, monsters, trees. She let Ilya pick 3. Why 3? He asked, because rules require reasons. Because to have to talk to each other and one has to listen, she said. That's how stories work. He chose a triceratops. His brand was strong, a little plastic house, and a dog. He set the dog outside the house and the dinosaur between them like a guard. Tell me the job of each, doctor, Myra said. The house holds, Ilya said without thinking. The dinosaur says when to stop. The dog is sick, but also scared, doctor, Myra nodded. That sounds true. They played at talking about it while not talking about it, as good therapy allows. Later, she asked Andre to come in alone. The body remembers corridors, she said. Yours and his. You did a thing that saved his life. That can coexist with fear that lingers like smoke after the fire is out? Well, teach both of you some tricks, breathing that convinces the heart, thoughts that don't take the steering wheel, rituals that stand between you and the old pictures. You love routines? Well, make some that work for you. I do love routines, Andre said, almost laughing because the sentence felt like being seen in the least impressive, most accurate way. They made a list on a whiteboard, door ritual hand on jam, look, name 5 ordinary things, water ritual sip, swallow. Name 3 tastes, night watch light on or off by choice. Sentence, we're here. Scarce story, agree on how to tell it, dog bite, long story, okay. Brave book, Ilya draws a page per week. One thing he did, even though it was scary homework, felt like a rope tossed across a gap. Andre took it with gratitude disproportionate to the size of the tasks and did not apologize for that. The bureaucracy arrived in its turn, carrying clipboards and rubber stamps. Animal control called to confirm the case file and ask if had seen signs of other animals behaving oddly. He had not. The landlord emailed an apology framed as a policy reminder about not feeding animals in common areas. Andre wrote back something polite that contained none of the night. Insurance requested codes, dates, signatures. He provided them in triplicate, discovering a surprising pleasure in boxes filled correctly. Public Health sent a letter on heavy paper affirming completion of post-exposure prophylaxis and outlining the vanishingly small chance of late complications. Andre pinned it inside a kitchen cabinet like a saint's icon. One afternoon in the elevator, a neighbor's kid asked with the blunt efficiency of childhood, "Did you almost die?" Ilya looked at him, considered, and said no. But a bad thing tried and the good team won. He lifted his sleeve just enough to show the scar. The other boy was appropriately impressed. At school, a rumor sprouted that Ilya had killed a wolf. Genya insisted it had been 3 wolves. Someone said 5. Ms. Halperin gently reset expectations with a unit on contagion, compassion, and the difference between stories that help and stories that make you feel big for 5 minutes and small afterward. In art, the class drew animals with thought bubbles. Ilya's dog thought, "I don't know why I'm like this." A classmate drew a cat thinking, "Same." The days began to stack like plates you don't fear will slide. Andre noticed his own body changing tempo. The pause at the apartment door was the length of a breath and not a paragraph. The hum of the kettle no longer sounded like a warning. The way light fell into the living room at 4 o'clock reminded him of the first months after Ilya was born, when time was a creature they fed together. On day 14, they returned for the final vaccine. The nurse with the enamel microbes pinned a paper medal to Ilya's shirt, rabies pep champion. Rafi found them in the corridor and offered a mock press conference. "Sir, how do you feel finishing the series?" he asked, holding a pen like a microphone. Hungry, Ilya said, and fast. Will you be signing with a major team? Raffi asked. I already did, Ilya said, pointing at Andrei. Were the Holding House Dragons? Strong brand, Raffi said, writing nothing on his clipboard and everything on Andrei's heart. They marked the evening with pizza topped with ingredients chosen entirely by Ilya's sense of color rather than taste. He took one heroic bite and then declared peppers aesthetically superior to edible. Andrei ate 3 slices because fathers are composters for failed experiments. Later, they unpacked a package from Aunt Sveta, a small framed print of a Japanese woodblock wave, the kind that looks like a hand making a fist, and a note, you crossed it. Hang this where you can see it. They put it above the doorway, where thresholds lived. The nightmares did not end the day the schedule did. Life is not a calendar, but they changed shape and frequency, the way weather does when a season decides to move on. Sometimes fear arrived in the afternoon, disguised as fussiness about homework or rage at a broken pencil. Sometimes it arrived for Andrei as a fog in the cereal aisle or a sense that the apartment was a museum to a night they didn't want to give free rent. They practiced the rituals anyway. Hand on jam, name 5 ordinary things. Keys, shoes, lamp, blue mug, rocket sticker, SIP water, cold, tap, slightly metallic. Say the sentence, we're here. On a Saturday that returned them to the square on the calendar, soccer resumed on a field that had thawed into the familiar smell of wet grass and possibility. The coach, who had always understood that 6-year-olds and 12-year-olds and some 40-year-olds learn best with metaphors, pulled the team into a huddle. Here's the deal, she said. Sometimes you get scared of the ball because last week it hit you in the nose. Sometimes you get scared of the night because last week it bit you in the arm. We don't pretend it didn't happen. We put the dinosaur between us and the thing. Then we play. The team nodded with theatrical gravity. Ilya grinned. The whistle sang. The game moved forward, a set of small agreed-upon miracles, that a round thing rolled where you told it, that friends arrived where you needed them, that you could make a shape together greater than any single child's speed. After they bought ice cream from a truck whose music tasted like childhood. A kid asked about the scar. Ilya said, dog bite, long story, I'm okay. He didn't look at Andrei for permission. He didn't need to. That night, sitting on the balcony with tea that had finally started to taste like tea instead of alarm, Andrei watched the building across the street switch on its rooms in a pattern that always made him think of a moving score. People made dinners, made calls, made mistakes, made up. A woman watered plants. A man danced alone. A kid taped paper to a window and colored with a marker that squeaked like a mouse agreeing to a contract. Life was a chorus louder than any single memory. You're thinking loud, Ilya said, appearing in the doorway with a blanket as if he were 80. I am, Andrei admitted. I'm thinking about doors. Doors are dumb if you forget how to open them, Ilya said, climbing into the second chair and tucking his feet under himself. True, Andrei said. Good doors let the right things in. What are the right things? Ilya asked. Bread, jokes, friends, sleep, Andrei said. And you? Dinosaurs, Ilya added. Also the word ordinary. It's better than it sounds. They sat there while the city practiced its breathing. Somewhere a dog barked the ordinary kind, full of hierarchy and boredom, and Andrei registered it without his body turning into a siren. He did not bless the sound, but he allowed it. In bed that night, he reached up and touched the little wave above the doorframe. He liked the idea of a picture that knew how to move and didn't. He liked the fact that if you stared, you could see the foam curl into claws and fingers and then see it become water again. He turned out the light. The sentence arrived of its own accord, less spell now, more statement of account. We're here, he said into the dark. Yeah, Ilya said, already halfway to sleep. And tomorrow is Saturday again. Tomorrow would also be bills and laundry and a meeting with the psychologist and a permission slip and the grocery list and a phone call to his sister and a memory in the cereal aisle, because recovery is not a straight road. but the line from the door to the kitchen to the bed was continuous and unbroken. The dresser stood where dressers belong. The calendar had squares that meant soccer instead of panic. The scar had cooled from angry red to thoughtful pink. The apartment did not know what had happened in it. That was a kindness. The people in it did. That was a kind of armor. And when the morning came, it tasted like Monday again, and then like Tuesday, and then like something better than a day of the week. A life rebuilt, not as if nothing had happened, but as if everything that had happened could be carried without breaking the carrier. The night visitor's night had become a territory all its own. Daytime was full of routines: school, work, meals, laundry, appointments. But when the lights dimmed, when the refrigerator hummed louder than it should, shadows grew edges. The first night back in their apartment, Ilya had slept sideways in his bed, mouth open, one hand dangling like a question mark. Andrei had watched from the doorway until his own eyes shut. But by the second week, the boy began to stir, whimpering, as if rehearsing some memory only his body still carried. One night he woke gasping, clutching his throat. "I couldn't drink," he cried, words tripping over breath. "In my dream the water tried to choke me." Andrei pulled him close, heart pounding at the cruel accuracy of the dream. He whispered the ritual sentence, "We're here until," the tremor left Ilya's body. Then he sat awake long after, thinking about the virus, about how close they had come, about how thin the line between ordinary and catastrophe could be. He found himself standing in the hallway some nights, hand pressed against the wall where the dresser had once jammed the bedroom door shut. He would stare at that space until it blurred. Sometimes he imagined the dog still on the other side, silent, waiting. Therapy. Again and again, doctor. Myra became part of their lives the way a neighbor might a person whose presence was routine, expected, oddly comforting. Ilya played in the sand trays, arranging figurines into battles and truces. One day he lined up 3 dinosaurs against one small plastic dog. "They win because they're a team," he explained. "The dog doesn't have a team." "Do you feel like you have a team, Dr.?" Myra asked. "Yeah," Ilya said, glancing at Andrei through the glass window. "Me and Dad. And the doctors. And the nurse with the dinosaur scratcher." Later, Andrei sat in the same chair. His words came halting, but Myra never hurried him. "I can't stop seeing it," he admitted. "Not just the dog, but the moment, the silence before I saw him on the floor. Like the air already knew." "That's hypervigilance," she said. "Your mind cataloged danger. It doesn't yet trust that the danger has ended. We can teach it to refile those memories." They practiced breathing exercises, grounding rituals, reframing techniques. Some worked, some didn't. But the act of practice itself felt like armor. Schoolyard echoes at school, Ilya's scar became both shield and target. Some kids asked to see it with awe, others with curiosity. One boy whispered, "Rabies boy," not cruelly, but as if testing the weight of a new nickname. Ilya told Dr. Myra about it. She asked, "What would you like to say back when someone says that?" "Maybe, better rabies boy than zombie boy," Ilya said with a grin. "Humor is a weapon," Myra said, "and a shield." The next time it happened, Ilya used the line. The other boy laughed, and the nickname lost its teeth. The father's guilt, Andrei wrestled with shadows of his own. Alone at night, he replayed questions. What if he'd come home earlier? What if I hadn't left him alone? What if he'd ignored the meeting? He told Myra once, voice low, "I keep thinking I should have been there to stop it." She looked at him for a long time before answering. Parents always wish they could prevent pain. But the truth is, you were there in the only way that mattered. You acted when it counted. You saved him. That is the chapter that belongs to you. Still, guilt clung like damp clothes. He carried it to work, to the grocery store, to the balcony where he smoked the cigarette he'd sworn he was done with. But some mornings, when he saw Ilya run down the hallway with his backpack thumping like a drum, Andrei felt guilt loosen its grip. Maybe not gone, but looser. Dreams of teeth one night. Weeks later, Ilya drew a picture for homework. A house with a red roof, a tree with 5 branches, and a dog with an open mouth. When Andrei asked, Ilya said, "That's not the dog. That's just a dream of teeth. Dreams can't bite you. Andrei put the drawing on the fridge anyway, right next to the vaccine schedule, which had become less of a reminder and more of a trophy. The dog was dead. The test was positive. The treatment was complete. Yet fear was alive, its teeth invisible. Andrei began writing down each nightmare Ilya described, not as omens but as stories. If we write them down, he explained, they stop living in your head rent-free. Soon they had a notebook labeled Book of Scary Dreams. Reading it aloud turned fear into theater and theater into laughter. Light returns months passed. The scar faded to a thin pale line. Ilya called it his dragon mark, insisting it meant had survived a battle. At soccer practice he showed it off proudly. Other boys compared it to scraped knees and stitches, and suddenly it was just another badge of childhood. Andrei still pressed his hand to the wall sometimes, but less often. And when he did, he found himself counting not memories of the night, but sounds of the present, the hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, the faint scratching of Ilya's pencil in his room. Fear had not left, but it had learned to sit in the corner quietly, no longer snarling, no longer foaming. For both father and son, recovery was not about forgetting the night. It was about learning to live with it like a scar you don't need to hide. The scar as a story by summer, the scar on Ilya's arm had faded to a pale curve, the color of old paper. He would roll up his sleeve sometimes and trace it with a fingertip. It looks like a smile, he said one morning at breakfast, but sideways. Andrei glanced at it, then at his son's eyes. A smile's not a bad thing to carry, even if it came from a bite. Ilya asked. Especially then, Andrei replied, "It means you won." At school, the scar became a shorthand. When kids asked, Ilya simply held it up and said, "Dog bite." Long story? I'm fine. The brevity gave him control, and control gave him peace. New days, old shadows, not every day was simple. Sometimes a bark in the street made Ilya freeze. Sometimes Andrei still woke in the night, convinced he'd hear claws against the door. But rituals helped. They would name 5 ordinary things aloud together, or drink a glass of water slowly, or simply say the sentence "we're here." Fear still lived with them, but it no longer led the way. Lessons written in flesh. One evening, Andrei watched Ilya write in his school journal. Bravery doesn't mean not being scared. It means you do things even though you're scared. My dad was brave when he moved the dresser. I was brave when I went back to school. The doctors were brave because they knew how to fight things too small to see. Andrei read it twice, then folded the paper into his wallet. Some truths are better than prescriptions. The future opening a year later, on the anniversary, Andrei and Ilya walked to the riverbank where families gathered with kites. Ilya held a bright red one, its string trembling in his hands. He looked at his scar, then at the sky. "Do you think he'll forget it someday?" he asked. "No," Andrei said honestly, "but you'll remember it differently, like a story you told yourself a long time ago." Ilya let the kite rise. It climbed in the wind, line humming. The scar on his arm caught the sunlight, and for a moment it really did look like a smile, turned sideways, pointing upward. Andrei breathed slow and full, as if the air itself were medicine. The dog was gone. The fear had softened. What remained was a mark, a reminder, a story, and a promise. They were here, and tomorrow was theirs.